The alarm in my chest pod woke me before the ship's own signal did. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the way the deck hummed beneath my feet, a low shiver that did not belong to any system I recognized. My name is Ren, and I was not built for moments like this. I am, by training and by nature, an observer. My people, the Solinari, do not fight. We have not fought in longer than our written history can measure. When two of us disagree, we sit across a table and argue with words until one side yields or a mediator decides the matter. That is the whole of our conflict. No blood, no noise, no fear. So when the council selected me to travel to the human world and record a single military engagement for the Interspecies Conduct Archive, I did not think much of it. I imagined shouting. I imagined weapons raised and lowered without ever being used, the way ours are during our own ceremonial disputes. I imagined a performance. I was wrong before I even stepped off the shuttle. The human base was called Camp Ashwood, a cluster of gray buildings pressed against a tree line so dense it looked like a wall. The air smelled of metal and rain. Soldiers moved past me in twos and threes, boots striking the ground with a rhythm that felt almost musical, if music could carry a warning inside it. A tall woman met me at the landing pad. She had dark hair pulled back tight, and eyes that studied me the way a scientist studies a sample. "You're the observer," she said. It was not a question. "I am Ren," I answered. "I was told a Captain Frost would be my liaison. That's me, Elena Frost." She did not offer a hand, and I was grateful for that. "Solinari, do not touch strangers. Command said you're here to watch. Just watch, nothing else." "That is correct. I will not interfere." She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that seemed to weigh something invisible. "Good. Try to remember that when the time comes." I did not understand what she meant then. I would understand soon enough. She led me through the camp, and I recorded everything with the small device strung around my neck, the way I had been trained. I noted the height of the fences. I noted the number of vehicles parked in neat rows. I noted, with some confusion, that the soldiers laughed often. They laughed while cleaning their equipment. They laughed while eating from metal trays. One man laughed so hard at something his friend said that he nearly dropped the weapon he was carrying, and instead of alarm, everyone nearby simply laughed harder. I asked Elena about this. "Are they not aware of the danger ahead?" "They're aware," she said. "That's exactly why they're laughing." I wrote that down without understanding it. I would understand it later, and by then I would wish I still did not. We reached a long building with a low ceiling, filled with cots and quiet conversation. This was where I would stay until the engagement began. Elena introduced me to a few of the soldiers, though I already sensed I was more a curiosity to them than a guest. A young man named Owen Hart shook a container of coffee at me and asked if my kind drank anything that would wake the dead. I told him we did not have a phrase for that. He laughed for a long time. A woman named Grace Bell showed me a photograph of a dog she had left behind. Her voice softened when she spoke of it, the same voice I had heard her use minutes earlier when giving sharp instructions to a younger soldier. It struck me as strange that such different tones could live inside the same person, ready to switch places in an instant. Everywhere I looked, I found this same pattern: warmth beside readiness, softness folded around something harder underneath, like cloth wrapped around a blade. That evening, Elena found me sitting near the edge of the camp, watching the tree line darken as the sun dropped behind it. She sat down beside me, closer than I expected, though I said nothing about it. "First time seeing humans up close?" she asked. "I have studied your species from records. This is different. Records don't tell you much," she said. "You have to be here. I have read that your kind engages in what you call combat, to resolve disputes between nations. I assumed it would resemble our own contests. Structured, limited, a demonstration of strength, followed by a decision." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I did not expect. "It's not going to look like anything you've studied. I need you to understand that before it starts. I am prepared to observe accurately." She turned to look at me, and there was no humor in her face now, none of the ease I had seen all day. "I'm not talking about accuracy. I'm talking about you. You should ask command to reassign this. Send someone else. Or nobody. I do not understand. My orders are clear. I will remain outside the engagement zone and record from a safe distance. Distance won't matter, she said quietly. Not the way you think it will. I remember feeling a small flicker of something unfamiliar in my chest. A kind of tightness I had no name for. I told myself it was simply the cold night air, though the temperature had not changed at all. Over the following 2 days, I continued my observations, though the tightness in my chest did not leave. I watched the soldiers prepare their equipment with careful, practiced hands. I watched them write letters and seal them into envelopes, some addressed to people whose names I did not recognize, others addressed to no one at all, simply folded and placed inside a small metal box near the entrance of the building. I asked Owen about the box. It is a superstition, he explained, though his smile did not quite match his words. You write a letter just in case. Most of us never send them. We just like knowing they're there. In case of what? He did not answer that directly. Instead he said, "You should get some rest, Ren. Big day tomorrow." I did not rest. I lay on the cot they had given me and stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of a camp full of people who somehow slept soundly despite what waited for them. I found myself wondering what kind of mind could carry so much calm, so close to danger. My own species could not manage such a thing. We avoided danger entirely, structured our whole society around never coming near it. These humans walked toward it and slept soundly the night before. The morning came fast, the way mornings do when you have not truly slept. Elena found me before the light had fully risen, already dressed in gear that made her look larger, harder, someone I almost did not recognize from the woman who had sat beside me 2 nights before. "Today," she said simply. "I am ready," I told her, though even as I said it, something in me doubted the words. She studied my face for a moment, and something like sympathy crossed hers, quickly hidden away. "No," she said, "you're not, but there's no version of this where you would be. Just stay where I put you, and don't look away, no matter how much you want to." Why would I want to look away? I am an observer. That is the whole purpose of my presence here. Elena did not answer right away. She simply turned and began walking toward the vehicles gathering at the edge of camp. Engines already rumbling low, soldiers climbing aboard with a quiet, practiced efficiency that felt like watching a machine assemble itself. I followed, my recording device steady around my neck, my legs steadier than I expected, though my mind was anything but. As we climbed into the vehicle, I caught sight of Grace Bell checking her equipment one final time. She noticed me watching and offered a small, tired smile. "First rule," she said, "whatever happens out there, it isn't about hate. Remember that. Whatever you see, it isn't about hate. Then what is it about?" The vehicle's engine roared to life before she could answer, drowning out whatever she might have said. The convoy began to move, rolling out through the gates of Camp Ashwood and toward the tree line, toward whatever waited beyond it. I watched the gray buildings shrink behind us, and I felt, for the first time since my arrival, a genuine and unfamiliar fear settle into my chest. I did not know yet what I was about to witness. I did not know that the word fight, when spoken by a human, meant something my species had no equivalent for, something built from equal parts devotion and desperation, something that would break apart every careful assumption I had carried onto that world. I only knew that Elena's warning, spoken 2 nights before under a darkening sky, had settled into me like a stone. You should ask command to reassign this. Send someone else, or nobody. I had not listened. I would spend the rest of my life wishing that I had. The convoy rattled along a narrow road cut through thick trees, the engines the only sound besides the wind pressing against the vehicle's canvas sides. I sat wedged between 2 soldiers who did not speak to me, their eyes fixed forward, their hands resting on equipment I did not fully understand. My recording device blinked steadily, gathering data I would later struggle to put into words that made any sense at all. I tried to focus on my training: observe, record, do not interfere, maintain distance. These were simple instructions, the kind I had followed 100 times on 100 quieter assignments. I told myself this would be no different, that whatever lay ahead was simply another data set to catalog, another entry for the archive. But the tightness in my chest did not agree with me. Beside me, a young soldier named Nathan Pierce checked his equipment for what must have been the 5th time since we left camp. His hands moved with a kind of nervous precision, fast but careful, as if his fingers needed something to do besides shake. "You all right?" Grace asked him from across the vehicle, her voice carrying easily over the engine noise. "Fine," Nathan said, though his voice cracked slightly on the word. "First time?" He nodded, jaw tight. Grace reached across and squeezed his shoulder once, firm and brief. "Stay close to me. You'll be all right." I found myself watching this exchange with an intensity that surprised me. On my world, comfort was offered through structured phrases, through formal acknowledgement of another's distress. What Grace offered Nathan was something else entirely, wordless and immediate, a kind of certainty passed from one person to another simply through contact and tone. I made a note of it. I did not yet understand why it mattered so much that I did. The vehicle slowed, then stopped. Elena's voice cut through the cabin, sharp and clear. "This is as far as we go by transport. Everyone out. Ren, you're with me." I climbed down onto soft ground still damp from recent rain. The trees here were taller than any I had seen near the camp, their canopy swallowing most of the pale morning light. Somewhere beyond them, distant and low, I heard a sound I did not recognize, a kind of rolling thunder that did not match the clear sky above us. "What is that sound?" I asked Elena. "That's the sound of it already starting somewhere else," she said. "Different unit, different position. We're not the only ones out here today." She led me along a narrow path, the rest of the unit fanning out silently around us, moving through the trees with a coordination that looked almost effortless despite how complex it clearly was. I struggled to keep pace, my legs unaccustomed to the uneven ground, my mind racing to process everything I was seeing. We reached a ridge overlooking a wide, shallow valley. Elena crouched low and motioned for me to do the same. "This is your position," she said quietly. "You stay here. No matter what you see, you stay here. Understood?" "Understood," I said, though the word felt hollow even as I spoke it. She studied me once more, the same weighing look from 2 nights before. "Whatever you're about to see, Ren, I need you to remember something. These people down there, on both sides, they're not doing this because they enjoy it. They're doing it because someone they love is depending on them not to stop. That's the only way any of this makes sense. Hold on to that when it gets hard to understand." Before I could ask what she meant, she was gone, moving down the ridge to join the rest of her unit, disappearing into the tree line below. I settled into position, my recording device angled toward the valley, my hands trembling in a way I did not know my body was capable of. The distant thunder grew louder, closer, until it was no longer distant at all. And then, without any further warning, the world in front of me erupted into something I had no framework to understand. I will not pretend, even now, that I fully grasped what unfolded in the valley below me over the following hours. The sounds alone were enough to overwhelm my senses, sharp cracks and low booms layered over shouted commands, and something that might have been screaming, though I could not always tell if it came from pain or simply the effort of survival. What struck me most, even in the chaos, was the coordination. This was not the wild, uncontrolled violence I had expected from my limited research. Every movement I could make out through the smoke and distance seemed to serve a purpose. Soldiers moved in patterns, covering one another, falling back and advancing in ways that seemed almost choreographed despite the clear danger surrounding every step. I saw Elena's unit advance along the tree line, and for a moment I lost sight of Nathan entirely. My chest tightened with something I did not want to name. Then I saw him again, moving low beside Grace, exactly where she had told him to stay, his earlier fear replaced by something sharper, more focused. At one point, through a gap in the smoke, I saw 2 soldiers pull a third away from danger, dragging him by his equipment straps toward safer ground while explosions tore up the earth around them. None of them hesitated. None of them stopped to consider the danger to themselves. They simply acted, as if the safety of their companion mattered more than their own survival. as if that calculation was not even a calculation at all, but something automatic, built into them at a level deeper than thought. I tried to record everything. My hands would not stop shaking. My careful clinical language, the words I had prepared in advance for this exact report, crumbled apart the moment I tried to use them. I found myself speaking into the device, not as an observer cataloging data, but as something closer to a witness, my voice cracking in ways I did not recognize as my own. "They are not fighting each other," I said aloud, though there was no one to hear me. "They are fighting for each other. I do not understand how these two things can look so similar and mean something so different." The engagement stretched on longer than I expected, the sounds rising and falling in waves, moments of terrible intensity followed by strange pockets of near silence that felt somehow worse. During one such silence, I saw a soldier kneel beside someone from the opposing side, someone clearly no longer able to continue, and offer aid rather than harm, a brief act of mercy carved out of the middle of everything else happening around them. I did not understand it. I still am not certain I fully do, but I recorded it, because even in my confusion, I understood that it mattered. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the smoke above the valley in shades of orange and gray, the sounds finally began to fade. Not because the engagement had ended cleanly, but because both sides seemed to have simply reached some exhausted, unspoken conclusion that this particular day was finished. I remained on the ridge long after the last sounds died away, my recording device still blinking, still gathering data I did not yet know how to process. My hands had not stopped trembling. Something inside me, something I had carried my entire life without ever questioning it, had cracked open, and I did not yet know what would fill the space it left behind. Elena found me there as darkness settled fully over the valley. She was tired in a way that went beyond her body, a tiredness that lived somewhere behind her eyes. She sat down beside me without a word. "You're still here," she said eventually. "You told me to stay. Most observers leave before it's over. Whatever excuse they can find." She glanced at me. "You stayed." I could not look away, I admitted. Even though I wanted to. Even though everything in me told me to close my eyes. Elena nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something she had already suspected. "That's the thing nobody warns you about," she said quietly. "It's not that watching this is hard. It's that once you understand what it actually is, you can't go back to seeing it the way you did before." I did not respond. I did not have words yet for what I was feeling. I only knew that whatever report I had been sent to write, whatever careful, structured document the council expected from me, it would not be the document I had imagined writing 2 days before. Something had changed in me on that ridge, something I would spend a long time trying to understand. And though I did not know it yet, the hardest part of everything I had witnessed was still ahead of me, waiting in the days that would follow, in the losses that had not yet been counted, and in the strange, aching admiration that was beginning to grow alongside my fear. The camp felt different when we returned to it that night. The same gray buildings stood in the same neat rows, the same lights glowed from the same windows, but something underneath it all had shifted, or perhaps it was simply that I had shifted, and the camp only looked the same because it had not changed at all. A count was taken almost immediately upon arrival. I stood near the entrance of the main building, unsure of where else to place myself, and watched as soldiers gathered in small, quiet clusters, exchanging names, confirming who had returned and who had not. There was no shouting during this process, no dramatic display of grief, only a kind of hushed, careful accounting, names spoken softly and checked against memory. Owen Hart, the soldier who had asked me about drinks that could wake the dead, found me standing there. His face looked older than it had 2 days before, though I knew that could not truly be possible in such a short span of time. Perhaps it was simply that I was seeing him more clearly now. "You made it through your first one," he said, though there was no humor in his voice this time. "I did not fight," I reminded him. "I only watched." Watching's its own kind of fighting sometimes. He looked past me, toward the building where the wounded were being tended. "You'll understand that more before this is over." I wanted to ask him what he meant by "before this is over," since I had assumed my assignment concluded with the single engagement I had already witnessed. But something in his expression told me this was not the moment for that question, and I let it go unasked. I did not sleep again that night. Instead, I sat near the edge of the camp, exactly where Elena had found me 2 nights before, and I replayed everything I had witnessed, trying to fit it into the careful frameworks I had brought with me from my own world. Nothing fit. Every attempt collapsed under the weight of what I had actually seen. My people had built an entire civilization around the avoidance of conflict, and I had always believed this made us wiser, gentler, more evolved than species who still relied on such crude methods to settle their disputes. Sitting there in the darkness, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a camp full of exhausted, grieving, still somehow gentle people, I was no longer certain that belief could survive what I had seen. Grace found me there eventually, her uniform still marked from the day's engagement, her eyes red in a way that told me she had allowed herself, briefly and privately, to grieve for whoever had not returned. She sat down beside me without asking permission, the same way Elena had. "You asked me a question earlier," she said, "before it started. You asked what it was about, if it wasn't about hate. I remember. I didn't answer you." She looked out toward the dark tree line beyond the camp's fence, the same trees that had swallowed so many people that day and given most of them back. "It's about this place. People like Nathan, who's never done this before and was terrified the whole way there, but still went, because the people beside him needed him to. It's about writing a letter you hope you never have to send, and putting it in a box anyway, just in case, so the people you love don't have to wonder." "That does not sound like something worth this cost," I said quietly, and immediately regretted the bluntness of the words, though Grace did not seem offended by them. "Maybe not," she agreed, "but it's the truth, and I'd rather you understand the truth of it than write some report that makes us sound like we're just good at hurting each other. We're not good at that. We're good at refusing to let each other be alone in it. That's the part that matters." I sat with her words long after she had gone to rest, turning them over in my mind alongside everything I had witnessed on the ridge. I did not yet know how to reconcile the horror of what I had seen with the strange, undeniable devotion that seemed to run beneath every part of it. I only knew that the careful, distant observer who had arrived at Camp Ashwood 2 days before no longer fully existed, and I did not yet know what would take his place. I would learn more in the days that followed, more than I had ever wanted to know, more than my careful Solinari mind had ever been built to hold. And though a part of me already understood that I would carry this knowledge for the rest of my life, I could not yet imagine how heavy that weight would eventually become, or how much heavier it would grow before I finally left that world behind. For now, I simply sat in the darkness, listening to the quiet sounds of a camp preparing, in its own tired and unspoken way, for whatever the next day would demand of it. And somewhere beneath my fear, beneath my confusion, beneath everything my training told me I should be feeling, a small and unfamiliar seed of something else had begun to grow. I did not yet have a word for it. I would find one, eventually, though it would take everything that followed to earn it. 3 days passed before the next call came, and in that time I did something I had not expected to do. I asked Elena if I could remain embedded with the unit rather than requesting a transfer back to a safer observation post, as my original orders technically allowed. She studied me for a long moment before agreeing, though she warned me, once again, that I might come to regret the choice. I told her I already regretted many things. Staying was not going to change that. The second engagement was larger than the first, a coordinated push across a wide stretch of open ground bordered by a river on one side and a ruined stretch of old buildings on the other. I was given a position inside a forward command post this time, a reinforced structure dug partly into the earth, close enough to hear voices clearly, but far enough, Elena insisted, to remain safe. I did not feel safe. I do not think anyone in that post felt safe, but I understood now, in a way I had not before, that safety was not the point. Purpose was the point. Marcus Vance ran communications from a station near the center of the post, a steady stream of voices flowing through his headset, coordinates and call signs and short, clipped confirmations that meant nothing to me, and everything to the people relying on them. He had a habit of repeating each confirmed message back exactly once, as if the repetition itself was a kind of promise. I heard him do this dozens of times over the following hours, his voice never rising, never cracking, even as the reports coming through his headset grew increasingly urgent. At one point, a voice came through reporting that a small group had become separated from the main advance, pinned down near the ruined buildings with no clear path back. I watched Marcus's hand tighten around the edge of his console. The only visible sign of the tension I now understood was running through him constantly, carefully hidden beneath his steady voice. "Copy," he said. "Hold position. Support is coming." He turned to Elena, who had been reviewing a map spread across a nearby table. "It's Nathan's group," he said quietly, "and Grace is with them." I saw something pass across Elena's face, quick and controlled, the same flicker I had seen the day I met her, when she studied me like a sample and decided, in that instant, what kind of person I was. She did not hesitate. "Get me a route," she said. What followed was one of the longest stretches of my life, though it lasted only a little over an hour by the clocks in the command post. I listened as Elena coordinated a rescue effort in real time, her voice calm even as the situation described through Marcus's headset grew steadily worse. I heard confirmation that the pinned group had taken losses. I heard, moments later, Nathan's voice itself, thin and strained but unmistakably alive, requesting an update on the promised support. "It's coming," Elena said into her own headset, though Nathan could not hear her directly. The words were meant for those of us in the post, who needed to hear them as much as he needed to hear something similar from his own commanding officer nearby. "Tell him it's coming, and tell him to hold." I sat in the corner of that command post, my recording device forgotten in my lap, and I understood something in that moment that no amount of careful study could have taught me. This was not chaos. This was devotion organized into a system, urgency shaped into precision, fear channeled into exactly the kind of calm, deliberate action required to save the people depending on it. When word finally came through that the pinned group had been reached, that support had broken through and was extracting them towards safer ground, the command post did not erupt into celebration. Instead, a kind of quiet, exhausted relief passed through the space, shoulders lowering, breaths released that I had not realized were being held. Marcus repeated the confirmation once, exactly as he had repeated every message before it, though his voice caught slightly this time, just once, before steadying again. Elena closed her eyes for a brief moment, no longer than a second or two, and then opened them and returned to the map spread across the table, already moving on to whatever came next. I did not fully understand, in that moment, why my chest felt so tight, why my eyes stung in a way unfamiliar to my physiology. I only knew that something had happened inside that command post that I did not have adequate words for, something built from fear and precision and an unwavering refusal to leave anyone behind, no matter the cost of retrieving them. The engagement continued for several more hours after that, and I recorded what I could, though my attention kept returning to the quiet exchange between Elena and Marcus, to the strained relief in Nathan's voice over the headset, to the strange, aching admiration growing steadily inside me despite everything my training told me I should be feeling instead. By the time the engagement finally concluded, the sun had long since set, and the command post had grown quiet, in the particular way exhausted places grow quiet, full of people moving slowly, speaking softly, conserving whatever energy remained after a day that had asked so much of them. I stepped outside into the cool night air, my legs unsteady beneath me, my mind struggling to process everything I had witnessed. Grace found me there a short while later, her uniform torn along one sleeve, a bandage wrapped hastily around her forearm, though she moved as though the injury barely registered to her. "You heard all of that," she said. It was not a question. I did. "Nathan's all right. Shaken up, but all right." She leaned against the wall beside me, wincing slightly as she did. "That's twice now. You've watched us nearly lose someone we couldn't afford to lose." "I do not understand how you carry this," I admitted. "The fear, the waiting, the not knowing, for that entire hour, whether the people you were coordinating support for would still be alive by the time it arrived." Grace was quiet for a moment, considering the question with more care than I expected. "You don't carry it alone," she finally said. That's the whole point of it. Elena wasn't carrying that fear by herself in there. Neither was Marcus. Neither was I. Out there, pinned down beside Nathan, waiting. We were all carrying pieces of it together. That's the only way it's carryable at all. I thought of my own species then, of our careful, structured avoidance of anything resembling danger, of disputes settled across tables with words instead of actions, of a civilization built entirely around never having to carry a fear like the one I had just witnessed. I had always believed this made us wiser, standing there in the cool night air, listening to Grace speak so plainly about carrying unbearable things together. I was no longer certain that belief could survive much longer. "Your commanding officer," I said slowly. "Elena." She did not hesitate when she learned it was Nathan's group. "She wouldn't have hesitated for anyone," Grace said. "That's not really about Nathan specifically. It's about all of us. Every single person in this unit knows that if it were them out there, pinned down with no clear way back, Elena would move just as fast, just as certain, to bring them home. That's what makes it possible to keep going out there in the first place. You have to know someone will come for you." I did not respond right away. I found myself thinking of the small metal box near the entrance of the sleeping quarters, filled with letters most soldiers hoped they would never need to send, and I understood, more clearly than I had before, exactly what Grace meant when she said that soldiers carried these fears together rather than alone. It was not the absence of fear that defined these people. It was what they chose to do with it, and who they chose to do it for. I returned to my sleeping quarters that night carrying more than data. I carried the beginning of an understanding I did not yet have adequate language for, something that would only grow heavier and more complicated in the days that remained before I was finally called upon to write the report I had been sent to that world to produce. The turning point, when it came, arrived without warning, the way I was slowly learning most important things did on that world. It happened on the 7th day of my extended stay, during what should have been a routine supply movement along a stretch of road the unit had traveled safely a dozen times before. I had been permitted to accompany a smaller group this time, Elena's decision, made after she watched me sit quietly through 2 engagements without once trying to interfere, without once breaking the boundaries she had set for me. I think by then, she had begun to trust that whatever change was happening inside me would not compromise the mission. I do not think she fully understood how deep that change had already grown. The road wound along the edge of a shallow ravine, thick brush pressing close on both sides. I rode in the second vehicle of a short convoy, seated across from a soldier named Daniel Cole, a quiet man who had spoken little to me during my time at the camp beyond brief, polite exchanges. He had a habit of humming softly to himself, a low, tuneless sound that I had found strangely comforting during the quieter stretches of my assignment. The first vehicle struck something in the road that none of us saw coming. I do not fully understand, even now, the exact mechanism of what happened, only that the world outside the transport erupted into sudden chaos, sound and motion tearing through what had been, moments before, an unremarkable afternoon. Our vehicle lurched hard to one side. I was thrown against the restraint holding me in place, my recording device torn from around my neck and lost somewhere in the sudden violence of motion. Shouting filled the space around me, urgent and sharp, though I could not immediately make sense of any of it. Daniel's hand closed around my arm before I fully understood what was happening, pulling me down and away from the vehicle's exposed side just as something struck the space where I had been sitting only a moment before. I do not know, even now, exactly what that something was. I only know that if Daniel had not moved when he did, if his instincts had been a fraction slower, I would not have survived to write this account. "Stay down," he said, his voice low and steady, despite everything happening around us. "Stay close to me." I obeyed without question, my body shaking in a way I had never before experienced, my mind unable to process the speed at which everything had shifted from routine to catastrophic. Daniel moved with a calm precision that stood in stark contrast to my own paralyzing fear, guiding me toward cover along the edge of the ravine, while the rest of the unit responded to whatever had struck the convoy. I do not know how long we remained there, pressed against the earth, the sounds of urgent voices and rapid movement filling the air around us. I only know that at some point, Daniel shifted his position slightly, placing himself more fully between me and the open road, and I understood, with a clarity that struck me harder than anything I had witnessed before, exactly what he was doing. He was protecting me. Not because it was his assignment, not because Elena had ordered it, because in the chaos of that moment, faced with a stranger from another world who had no capacity to defend himself, Daniel Cole had simply decided, without hesitation, that keeping me safe mattered more than his own safety. Why? I managed to ask, my voice barely audible even to myself. Are you doing this? I am not part of your unit. I am not even the same species as you. Daniel glanced at me, and despite everything happening around us, something almost like a smile crossed his face, tired and brief. Doesn't matter, he said. You're here. That's enough. I did not have words for what I felt in that moment. My entire framework for understanding the universe, built across a lifetime of careful, structured avoidance of danger, and the crude conflicts that produced it, cracked open completely, and I did not know, in that instant, what would fill the space it left behind. The situation stabilized faster than I expected, though it did not feel fast while it was happening. Elena's voice cut through the chaos eventually, sharp and commanding, coordinating a response that pulled the convoy back into some semblance of order. When it was finally safe to move, Daniel helped me to my feet, his hand steady on my arm, and led me back toward the remaining vehicles. We had not escaped without cost. I learned, in the hour that followed, that 2 members of the unit had not survived the initial strike on the first vehicle. I did not know them well. I had exchanged only a handful of words with each of them during my time at the camp. And yet, standing there as their names were spoken softly among the rest of the unit, confirmed and recorded with the same quiet, careful accounting I had witnessed after the first engagement, I felt a grief I did not fully understand, sharp and unfamiliar, settling into the same tightness in my chest that had lived there since the moment I first watched this unit walk into danger. Elena found me sometime later, sitting apart from the others, Daniel nearby but giving me the space he seemed to instinctively understand I needed. She crouched down in front of me, her face marked with the same exhaustion I had seen in her after every engagement so far, though something in her expression had shifted since the first day I met her. You almost died today, she said quietly. I know. Daniel got you clear. If he hadn't. I know, I said again, my voice breaking in a way I did not recognize as my own. I do not understand why he did it. I am not one of you. I owe your unit nothing, and you owe me even less. And yet he placed himself in danger to protect me, without a single moment of hesitation. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an expression I could not fully read. That's the thing you still haven't understood, she finally said. It was never about who you are, or where you're from, or what you owe each other. Daniel didn't stop to calculate any of that. He just saw someone in danger who couldn't protect themselves, and he moved. That's all it ever is, underneath everything else. Someone in danger, someone willing to move. My people would call that irrational, I said quietly. We are taught to weigh risk carefully, to avoid unnecessary danger, to preserve ourselves above all else. What Daniel did today violates every principle I was raised to believe in. Maybe, Elena said, or maybe your people just never had to learn what it means to need someone else to move for you, without hesitation, without calculation. Maybe that's a harder thing to understand from the outside than it looks. I sat with her words long after she had gone to check on the rest of the unit, my mind turning over everything I had witnessed since arriving on that world. I thought of Grace's words in the darkness after the second engagement, about carrying unbearable things together rather than alone. I thought of Marcus's steady voice repeating each confirmation exactly once, a small promise offered again and again throughout the longest hour of that battle. I thought of the small metal box filled with letters near the entrance of the sleeping quarters, and of Daniel's hand closing around my arm, pulling me to safety without a single moment of hesitation. Something had shifted permanently inside me by the time the sun set that evening. I no longer saw the violence I had witnessed as senseless, or as evidence of some crude, undeveloped aspect of human nature that my own species had evolved beyond. I saw it now as something far more complicated, something built from an almost unbearable depth of devotion, a willingness to place oneself between danger and another person that had no true equivalent anywhere in my own culture's history. It terrified me. It still terrifies me, even now, remembering it. But beneath that terror, something else had begun to grow, something I did not yet have a word for, though I suspected, even then, that I would spend a long time searching for one. Daniel found me again as darkness fully settled over the camp, sitting down beside me without asking permission, the same way Elena and Grace had done before him. "You all right?" he asked. "I do not know," I answered honestly. "I have never felt gratitude like this before. My species does not experience it in quite the same way, I think. It is heavier than I expected. It sits differently than I imagined it would." Daniel nodded slowly, as though this answer made perfect sense to him. "Yeah," he said, "it does that." We sat together in silence for a long while after that, and though neither of us spoke, I understood, more clearly than I had understood anything since arriving on that world, that something had changed between us, that could not be undone. I had come to that world as a careful, distant observer, prepared to catalog human conflict as a curious, but ultimately foreign phenomenon. I was leaving that ravine as something else entirely, someone who now carried a debt of gratitude toward a stranger who had risked everything to save him, and who no longer knew how to view the people of that world with anything resembling the detached objectivity his mission had originally required. I did not know it yet, but the hardest part of my assignment was still ahead of me. The report I had been sent to write remained unwritten, and I would soon discover that everything I had witnessed, everything I had felt, made that report far more difficult to produce than I had ever imagined it would be. My recall notice arrived 2 days later, delivered through the small communication unit I had carried with me since landing on that world. The council had reviewed my preliminary data transmissions and determined that sufficient material had been gathered for the archive. I was to return to the shuttle within the week and prepare my final report for formal submission. I remember staring at that message for a long time before showing it to Elena. "You're leaving," she said, not quite a question. "Soon. I have been recalled." She nodded slowly, and something crossed her face that I had not expected to see there, something almost like reluctance. "How do you feel about that?" I considered the question carefully before answering, the way I had learned to consider most things during my time at Camp Ashwood. "I do not know," I admitted. "I came here believing I understood conflict. I believed my own species had transcended it, that we had built something wiser and safer than what I would find among your people. I no longer believe that." "What do you believe now?" "I am not certain yet. I believe I need to write my report before I fully understand what I believe." I spent my final 3 days at the camp attempting to draft that report, and I found, almost immediately, that the task was far more difficult than anything I had anticipated when I first accepted the assignment. The archive required a specific format, a clinical, structured accounting of observed behaviors, casualty figures, tactical patterns, and a final threat assessment summarizing the overall danger posed by the species in question. I sat with my recording device and my notes for hours at a time, attempting to translate everything I had witnessed into that required format, and every attempt collapsed beneath the weight of what I actually knew to be true. How could I describe Marcus's steady voice, repeating each confirmation exactly once, as simply a tactical communication pattern? How could I reduce Grace's tired smile the morning before the first engagement, or her plain, unadorned explanation of what devotion actually meant among her people, into a single line of behavioral data? How could I summarize Daniel's hand closing around my arm, pulling me to safety without a moment of hesitation, as anything other than exactly what it was, an act of selfless protection extended towards someone who had no claim to it whatsoever? Every version of the report I attempted felt like a betrayal, a flattening of something vast and complicated into something small and manageable, something that could be filed away and forgotten without ever conveying the truth of what I had actually witnessed. On my final night at the camp, I found Elena sitting alone near the edge of the fence line, exactly where I had first spoken with her days before, though it felt now like a different lifetime entirely. "I cannot write the report they expect," I told her, sitting down beside her without needing to ask permission this time. "Every attempt I make feels dishonest. What do you want to write instead? I do not know if the archive has a format for what I actually want to say." Elena was quiet for a while, looking out toward the dark tree line beyond the fence, the same trees that had swallowed so much and given back both loss and survival in equal, unpredictable measure. "Then don't use their format," she finally said. "Write the truth. Let them figure out what to do with it." I thought about her words for a long time after she had gone to rest, and when the morning finally came, I sat down and began writing my report, not as a clinical accounting of behaviors and casualty figures, but as something closer to what Elena had suggested, an honest account of everything I had witnessed and everything it had made me understand. I wrote about the first engagement and the strange, aching gap between what I had expected to see and what I actually witnessed, the coordination and sacrifice woven so tightly together that they became, in practice, nearly indistinguishable from one another. I wrote about the second engagement, about Marcus's steady voice and Elena's unhesitating decision to risk everything for Nathan and Grace, about the quiet, exhausted relief that filled the command post when word came through that they had been reached in time. I wrote about the ravine, about Daniel's hand closing around my arm, about a debt of gratitude I still did not fully know how to carry. And I wrote, finally, about what I believed all of it meant. I wrote, that my initial assumptions about this species were fundamentally incomplete. I arrived expecting to catalog a dangerous, undisciplined tendency toward violence, evidence of a civilization that had not yet learned the wisdom my own species had achieved through centuries of careful conflict avoidance. What I found instead was something far more complicated and far more difficult to simply dismiss as primitive or dangerous. The humans of Camp Ashwood do not fight because they lack the capacity for peace. They fight, when circumstances demand it of them, because they have built something among themselves that my own species has never developed, a depth of mutual devotion so complete that individuals will place themselves in mortal danger without a single moment of hesitation, simply because someone they care for requires it of them. This is not senseless violence. It is love, made functional under the worst possible circumstances, weaponized not out of hatred for an enemy, but out of an unbreakable commitment to one another. I do not know how to classify this within the standard threat assessment framework required by the archive. I am not certain it should be classified as a threat at all, though I understand why species observing this behavior from the outside, as I once did, might initially conclude that it should be. What I witnessed was not the absence of wisdom. It was a different kind of wisdom entirely, one built not around the avoidance of danger, but around an unwavering commitment to face it together, and to never allow another person to face it alone. I recommend, therefore, that future observations of human military engagement be conducted with significant caution regarding the conclusions drawn from them. It would be a grave error to view this species as simply violent, simply dangerous, simply undisciplined. It would be a far greater error to underestimate what they are truly capable of when the people they love are placed in danger. I do not believe I fully understood the weight of that capability until I witnessed it firsthand, and I do not believe any report, however carefully constructed, can fully convey it to someone who has not stood where I stood and watched what I watched. I request, in conclusion, reassignment away from further direct observation duties involving this species. Not because I believe the assignment to be unsafe, though it certainly was, but because I no longer believe I can maintain the objective distance the archive requires of its observers. I have become, against every principle of my training, something closer to a witness than an observer, and I do not believe that distinction can be undone. I submitted that report exactly as written, without softening its language, without translating it back into the clinical format the Council would likely have preferred. I do not know, even now, how it was ultimately received, whether it was filed away as an aberration, dismissed as the emotional overreaction of an inexperienced observer, or whether it prompted any genuine reconsideration among those who read it. I said my goodbyes to the unit on my final morning at Camp Ashwood. Elena shook my hand this time. A gesture I understood now carried far more weight than I had recognized when I first arrived, unwilling to offer or receive such contact from a stranger. Grace embraced me briefly, an act my species does not typically practice, though I found I did not mind it nearly as much as I once would have expected to. Marcus offered a quiet nod, the same steady calm he carried through every crisis I had witnessed him navigate. Owen made one final joke about drinks that could wake the dead, though his eyes were not entirely dry as he said it. Daniel found me last, near the transport that would carry me back to the shuttle. He did not say much, he simply extended his hand, and I took it, understanding now exactly what such a gesture meant among his people. A small, physical acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us in that ravine, everything neither of us would ever fully be able to put into words. "Thank you," I told him, "for a choice I still do not fully understand, but which I will carry with me for the rest of my life." "Don't overthink it," he said, with the same tired half-smile I remembered from the day he pulled me to safety. "It's just what you do." I have thought about those words many times since leaving that world. It's just what you do. Such a simple phrase, spoken so easily, to describe an act that had shattered every assumption I had carried onto that battlefield. I returned to my own world, changed in ways I am still, even now, working to fully understand. My people continue their careful, structured avoidance of conflict, their quiet pride in a civilization that has never known war. I no longer view that pride with the same uncomplicated certainty I once did. I have seen what lies on the other side of that avoidance, and though I would never wish the cost of it upon my own people, I can no longer pretend that what I witnessed among the humans of Camp Ashwood was simply primitive, simply dangerous, simply something to be catalogued and dismissed. I close my eyes some nights and I am back on that ridge, watching smoke rise over a valley I did not understand. I close my eyes other nights and I am back in that command post, listening to Marcus repeat a confirmation exactly once, a small promise offered into the darkness. I close my eyes most nights, though, and I am back in that ravine, feeling Daniel's hand close around my arm, pulling me towards safety without a single moment of hesitation, and I understand, more clearly each time, that I did not travel to that world simply to observe a species capable of terrible violence. I traveled there, without ever intending to, and without ever fully being prepared for it, to witness a species capable of loving one another so completely that they would face anything, endure anything, and risk everything, simply because someone they cared for needed them to. I do not know if I regret going, in the end. I told myself once that I did. In the earliest days of my assignment, overwhelmed by fear and confusion, I had no framework to process. I understand now that what I actually regret is not having gone. What I regret is that I cannot forget what I learned there, and that I will never again be able to view my own careful, peaceful, untested civilization with quite the same uncomplicated pride I once carried without question. What I witnessed, in the end, was something far larger than fighting alone. I witnessed what people are willing to become when the ones they love are placed in danger, and I do not believe I will ever fully finish carrying the weight of that understanding. I do not know if that makes me wiser than I was before I went. I only know that I am no longer the same person who boarded that shuttle, certain of everything my careful, untested world had taught me to believe. And some part of me, even now, quietly and reluctantly, is grateful for that.